translation will be on Channel 2. Please try whether your little machines work as they are supposed to. Okay, so I think we should start. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be here with you today and to welcome you on behalf of Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation to today's expert panel, Entrepreneurship as an Engine to Economic Growth Towards a Modern SME Policy in Ukraine. As the German Foundation for Liberal Politics, Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation for Freedom naturally takes great interest in liberal policy approaches. This includes initiating dialogue and social change aimed at facilitating economic activity that is so important for Ukraine's future development. One significant obstacle to economic activity, like economic growth, higher productivity, and employment creation, is the lack of free and fair competition. Economic competition is a crucial driving force behind boosting innovation and economic efficiency. And it is a challenge, a substantial challenge to big companies and oligopolistic networks. Particularly medium-sized enterprises have a decisive role to play in economic competitiveness. But only recently do more of Ukraine's policymakers acknowledge that medium-sized companies could substantially contribute to Ukraine's economic development. Back in 2013, when deciding on new project objectives for another 3 years, the foundation teamed up with Berlin Economics and its experienced economic experts to cooperate on a project identifying SME needs in Ukraine. The objective was to propose targeted measures to improve framework conditions for SME in the short term, to promote competition in the Ukrainian economy in the long run. With this undertaking, we meant to provide not only selected policy recommendations, but sketch out the principles of a comprehensive and holistic SME development policy. Times have changed tremendously since then, and with that change came even more opportunities for potentially successful high-growth companies. They include greater access to European markets for Ukrainian goods, the opportunity to grow domestic industries like IT, and the opportunity to attract new dynamic investments to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the team of German and Ukrainian experts researched and prepared a concise policy paper towards a modern SME policy in Ukraine. The paper addresses policymakers and contributes to the dialogue between policymakers and the Ukrainian society, such as business associations. It is available here for you in Ukrainian and English. The team of German and Ukrainian experts that carried out the work is available as well, here on that panel, to introduce and discuss their findings with you. Dr. Ricardo Giucci, the second from my left, is the managing director of Berlin Economics, the company that advises Ukrainian state authorities on a wide range of economic issues for many years. But he also consults private clients on financial sector issues. He is here today, first and foremost, to explain the situation regarding SMEs' access to finance and to highlight problems and possible solutions in that specific field. Dr. Alexander Knuth, to my left, is an experienced economic and business consultant. He had the project lead, as he is an expert for entrepreneurship and small and medium-sized companies, startups in particular. Artur Kovalchuk is Research Associate for the Kyiv Institute for Economic Analysis and Policy Consulting. He has taken care of all data gathering, and he has translated the policy paper into Ukrainian and made sure that no content has been lost by a non-specialist translation. Thomas Otten, to the far left, contributes his taxation expertise to the team. He has been working in Ukraine for many years, consulting businesses on tax affairs as managing director of his own company. Lubomir Chorny, in the middle, will moderate today's discussion. He heads the Institute for Public Policy in Kyiv. Actually, he is a legal expert, but with a proclivity towards politics and civic participation, if you allow me to say that. And he is co-founder of a national platform for small and medium-sized businesses. Before I give the floor to Lubomir now, I would like to already invite you to continue today's discussion, if you wish, at a small reception in that cafe over there, after the discussion here has come to its end. Now I'm eager to see what we can do in the next 2 years and beyond to follow up on the above-mentioned opportunities that a more free and more competitive market holds in store for Ukraine. Dziękuję za uwagę, and Lubomir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miriam. So actually, today's topic is rather interesting, as in view of, as in the recent years, we are accustomed, when we speak about economic growth, economic increment, normally from public officials we saw of the industry, major companies, big industries, large business. Actually, when you take, however, statistics for the last 3 years, we shall observe that actually in Ukraine the real growth, real economic growth took place in the sector of small and medium business. If we take quite indicative numbers of the city of Kyiv, we shall observe that the number of economic agents, basically speaking, of those representing SME, have downsized, have reduced. However, productivity of labor, which was expressed in the amount of products sold, remained unchanged or increased, depending on the regions. This might demonstrate that in spite of reduction of the number of economic agents, there was a growth. It means that efficiency of operation of such economic agents was improving, and this is rather significant. On the other hand, even more significant, especially from economic perspective and social perspective, is that in small and medium business today in Ukraine, if we take away public sector and banking institutions, more than 50% of all employees are employed. Its importance for such issue as employment is difficult to overestimate. However, traditionally, we just dig our little orchard and we look into the situation that we have from our own perspective. However, international consultants quite often give us an opportunity that of what is happening from another perspective, to observe such things that sometimes are not really noticeable or are not really clear. Basically speaking, as in this report and in preparation of these recommendations, we have involved German consultants representing one of the most efficient economies of the world. To me personally, and I believe also to you, will be of great interest to hear of their findings. Not just recommendations, but also certain generalizations about the structure of those economic agents that fall within the class of SME. In view of that, I believe it's worthwhile to note that in the document you will be able to read later on, there are two parts. The first part is research, analytical part, where we can observe what and how was studied on one hand. On the other hand, we shall observe recommendations. Some of them are of general strategic level. That part, I believe, is interesting to us because it reflects that view, which is different from what we are accustomed to. The second part are some selected recommendations, specific ones that the new government, new parliament might use in order to change the situation which exists in the economy and to prevent those negative trends that we have now observed. I will not distract too much of your attention. I would not like to take more time from my colleagues. Immediately, I would like to give the floor to Alexander Knuth. Still, I would like to make a small reservation. He presents the main part, so he will be the main keynote speaker these days, and his colleagues representing a German group of advisors as well as a Ukrainian consultant who helped making that research will also make comments and additions after the speech of Mr. Alexander. So, Mr. Alexander, you have the floor.
Включіть, будь ласка, мікрофон.
Analysis of the SME sector in Ukraine. And this analysis makes sense if you are able to compare the SME sector in Ukraine with the SME sectors of other countries. So I've chosen a couple of countries that could be regarded as peer countries. And of course, I included figures on Germany because as German experts, I consider you are interested in the situation in Germany and comparison with the situation in Germany. And when you compare the SME sector, when you analyze an SME sector, you usually have three indicators. And these indicators are enterprises, number of enterprises. Second is employment, and third is sales. So what you can see here is that in Ukraine, 99% of all enterprises are small or medium-sized. It's only 0.1% of the enterprises are big enterprises. The small and medium-sized enterprises contribute 3/4 to the general employment. So 3 of 4 employees are employed in a small or medium-sized enterprise. And 60% of the sales are generated by SME in Ukraine. And I must remark, these figures include natural entrepreneurs, physical entrepreneurs, as well as corporations, because this is according to international standards. So when you look at these figures, and if you compare, when you compare these figures with the figures of the other countries, you probably notice that the SME sector in Ukraine is quite big. It's the biggest of all these countries on the slide. So one could say, or might say, so we have a very good SME policy in Ukraine because look, our SME sector is that big. On the other hand, if you look on the very right-hand side, if you look at Germany, the SME sector in Germany is, according to those indicators, much smaller. It's actually the smallest of all these countries. So, but nobody would agree if I said we have a bad SME policy in Germany. It's quite the opposite. The German SME are regarded as the backbone of the German economy. So, considering these indicators alone doesn't give us the big picture and doesn't give us insight. But one thing is striking already. Obviously, the aim of a modern SME policy is not to have many SME. I want to repeat that. It's not the aim to have many small and medium companies. What is then the aim of modern SME policy? I come back to that later. Before, I want to have a deeper look into the sector and what is needed, not only something about the size of companies, but also on the nature and quality of the business. And we have identified some groups of businesses within the SME sector, and this is a very special situation to Ukraine. So what we have here is a group subsistence businesses, and this consists of single entrepreneurs and micro enterprises whose only aim is to generate income for living. So these companies have no entrepreneurial motivation and no growth aspirations. Then we have freelancers. We have what we call stuck in the middle companies that are small and medium companies who are not growing. We have certainly innovative companies, growing companies in Ukraine, for instance in the ICT sector. And we have pseudo self-employed. With pseudo self-employed, I mean that natural physical entrepreneurs are self-employed by legal status, according to statistics, according to taxation, according to legislation. They are called physical entrepreneurs. However, there's no entrepreneurial motivation behind it, so they are not really entrepreneurs. What's interesting, you can find these similar groups in many countries. What's striking in Ukraine is that the group of subsistence businesses and pseudo self-employed and freelancers take such a huge part of the SME sector. So it's only 5% are really these kind of companies, what we have in mind when we talk about small and medium-sized enterprises. So these are corporations, these are growing companies with a scalable business model. Most of the SME sector in Ukraine are very tiny businesses. Most of them are single entrepreneurs, and most of them have no entrepreneurial motivation. These figures are based on official Ukrat data, but you will not be able to find these numbers on the Ukrastat website, because we have added experts' estimations. And I must explain, it's not so much about having a two-digit precision. So it's not about 38% or 57%. It's about showing a tendency. And the tendency is the striking fact that approximately more than 1/3 of the entrepreneurs are pseudo-self-employed, are not really entrepreneurs. And this gives an answer where problems in Ukraine are. It's not the size of the sector which is interesting, not the number of entities, but it's the number of entities who really act and behave like entrepreneurs. And this slide shows the picture how it should look like. So in a developed country, you should actually have no or just marginal size of subsistence businesses. Subsistence businesses is actually a phenomenon which you have in developing countries when growing from the agricultural stage to a pre-industrial stage. In these countries and those development stages, subsistence businesses can have a positive effect on transformation, but not in such a country like Ukraine. Freelancers are a very normal part of the business, but usually they play a niche role, a very important role, but a niche role in an economy. Stuck in the middle companies should not exist, meaning not that we should get rid of those companies, but they should not stuck. They should be able to grow. They should not be kept in a growth trap. Innovative, growth-oriented companies, that's the most interesting companies. That's those companies who create employment, who contribute to a company's growth, to a country's growth, and who contribute to country's wealth increasement. And again, pseudo-self-employed should not exist. There is this phenomenon of pseudo-self-employed in all countries, but the importance, the relevance of that group of people is very high in Ukraine, much higher than in all other EU countries. And this graph is only to show a bit about the regional diversification. It's not a judgment and not an evaluation. So the darker the field, the more SME are in that region. And there's nothing like an optimum amount of SME in a region. This shows only that, in contrast to some public arguments and public discussions, it's not the case that the west of Ukraine is dominated by SME and the east is dominated by big industries. It's not the case at all. So, as I said in the beginning, a modern SME policy, what should it look like? What are the objectives of a modern SME policy? As I said, having many small and medium-sized enterprises is not the objective. So what is it? Actually, it is the growth of small and medium enterprises. That's the objective. And to enhance this growth, that should be the task of a policy towards SME development. And foster competition between small and medium enterprises and big companies. And in order to do so, you need to ensure that you have a level playing field where small and medium enterprises have the same fair chances to compete on a market like big industries have. And what is the idea behind it? We've seen in economic research for more than 40 years now the mechanism that lead to employment creation and lead to innovation and growth. And according to that mechanism, which has been researched intensely in Germany, in Great Britain, in the United States, in Western Europe, in the transition countries, former transition countries like Poland, Slovakia, etc., and current transition countries in Russia and elsewhere in the world. And the mechanism is that the competition between small and medium-sized enterprises and big enterprises, it's that competition that creates pressure on businesses, and this pressure makes companies innovate. Because they fear the competition, they innovate. They create new products, explore new markets, try to serve their customers better, try to be competitive in production, in costs and in prices, and it's the competition pressure that leads to innovation. And it's important, mainly the competition between SME and big companies, not the competition between the SME. Because what the problem is, when you have so many small entities, small tiny entrepreneurs like in Ukraine, and they compete with each other, they crowd out each other. So the idea is, once you start up a business, you grow fast until you reach a sustainable size, a size which allows you to survive an economic crisis because you have some reserve, you have some backup, you might be able to go through bad times. And once you have reached this sustainable size and you have a scalable business model, which is scalable, meaning you can grow, then you want to grow and you want to become the big companies of tomorrow. And this puts a threat to incumbent companies because they see these newcomers and then they need to react. And this leads to innovation also in the big companies. And innovation, if it's innovation which is even internationally competitive, leads to growth of the entire economy, and this growth leads to employment. So this is the mechanism. It's not, and I repeat that, it's nowhere in the world that the SME sector itself creates employment. It's the competition between these. So this is our strategic objectives. So how would we translate that into the situation of Ukraine? What are our recommendations for policymakers in Ukraine today? According to our analysis of the groups we have some recommendations. And having these different groups of agents in the SME sector means we have different characteristics, they face different problems, different hurdles, so we need different policy approaches for each of these groups. Meaning, we cannot recommend something like a one-fits-all SME policy, but instead we have different policy approaches which all together form an SME policy program. So what are these approaches? First one is we need to help these subsistence businesses to transform into proper businesses. And what means proper businesses? Proper businesses means sustainable, scalable businesses. So we talk here about little market stalls, for instance, little repairers, little retailers, little import-export agents, which consist of one or two people. One is the worker, the second is the accountant. We come back later to this. And those tiny businesses are the Achilles fails of an economy. They are hit very much when economic crises. They are not able to survive when anything changes in the market. So the idea would be to help those businesses to create a business model which help them to grow and to reach a sustainable stage. The second is for freelancers. Freelancers in its nature have non-scalable business models. We talk about journalists, photographers, artists, dentists, doctors, medicals. And it's very normal that those businesses will not grow a lot. It's in the nature of this business. But because they cannot grow, because they are not able to employ a big administration staff, they need a very good lean framework in order to concentrate on their activities and not put much energy and effort and money in other things which are not related to their business. So here, policy needs to support by creating a very good framework, a very good regulatory framework. Stuck in the middle companies are companies that want to grow, so we need, as from the policy point of view, we need to help them to grow. So what are the problems? Why are they not growing? Identify growth barriers and help to reduce these growth barriers. Innovative companies are, from the policy point of view, the best companies, the jewels, because, as I said, it's the innovation that creates growth and employment. So here, the task of policymakers is to identify such innovative companies and support them to grow and to scale their innovation. And this is the most difficult part, actually, because it requires a lot of resources, a lot of expertise to identify future trends, to identify potential for a competitive, international competitive advantage of Ukraine, and then to foster these fields. So here SME policy is very much related to industrial policy. And for the pseudo-self-employed, this is actually a field which makes, which contributes not at all to economic wealth. So here is the task to help to reduce such pseudo-self-employment, to help those people to transform into proper businesses. So, having explained long-term strategic objectives from our point of view, I also want to give some concrete, some specific recommendations which can be implemented immediately. And for that, I would like to concentrate on the group of stuck in the middle and the innovative and growth-oriented enterprises. And part of our research was to find out what are the most important growth barriers for those companies, especially from the perspective, what are the growth barriers that the policy can influence. And there we came up with 2 growth barriers which are have very high relevance in Ukraine, and not only today, but they used to have high relevance for the last decade. And one is the limited, restricted access to finance for small and medium-sized enterprises. And the other one is the huge administrative burden from the side of state authorities against small and medium-sized enterprises. And we have identified some fields to give some specific recommendations. And one, for instance, is the primary documentation system. It has to do with accounting. It's not so much the taxation system. Taxation system has improved in Ukraine after the tax reform in 2011. But there are still parts of the accounting system which are from Soviet legacy, and this system creates a huge administrative burden. It's the case that once you start a corporation, not being a physical entrepreneur, but when you incorporate, you immediately need to employ an accountant because of this huge mess of work of accounting. And this is outdated, inefficient, and it's much more burden on companies than elsewhere in the world. So reforming that system in a way that suits the objectives of state authorities, but at the same time makes it easier for small and medium-sized enterprises would be one recommendation. The second is the system of business supervision, which puts a lot more pressure on SME than in most other countries in EU. And in the paper, it's a description how these mechanisms are, how this pressure how that puts pressure on SME. And the tax system, as I said, we have seen some improvement here, but further reforming would be one recommendation from our side. So, as I said, to sum up, the SME sector on first view is quite big. If you look deeper, you see a lot of problems. The sector is dominated by tiny businesses. You don't see much growing companies, you don't see much innovation. The sector is very volatile, and we have explained the long-term strategy, and we have given some specific recommendations on the short term. And the last word on these recommendations, why did we come up with those selected? Our aim is to give some recommendations which really could be of some help. And these recommendations are easy to implement immediately. They do not require public expenditure, public budget, and they will have immediate impact. So you will see effects very soon. And this is the idea of our approach, to recommend something which can have effects immediately and are easy to implement. I thank you very much for the attention, and you will have opportunity to ask me during our panel discussions. Thank you very much.
Дякую, Олександр.
Thank you, Alexander. Before we move to Q&A, when you directly are involved to our discussion and can ask your questions, I would simply like to utilize expertise of the colleagues sitting next to me in order to have an in-depth discussion of those issues raised by Alexander. Basically speaking, one such important thing normally in such surveys is data. In Ukraine, the situation with data is really special because on one hand, there is a state statistics department. On the other hand, more objective and quality data available from the tax authority. This is the situation which exists. Also, I have to note as well that understanding of small and medium business, small and medium companies, and big companies differs both inside European Union from one member country to another, and also when we compare European Union to Ukraine. Basically speaking, those accents using such data could be more highlighted by Mr. Kovalchuk, who helped this study from Ukrainian side. To speak about differences between the data about Ukraine and data about EU, we need to start with the definition of SME. In Ukraine, it's quite similar to the one which is used in European Union. However, in the EU, they're using another criterion, which is a size of equity. As far as other things are concerned, like the number of employees and sales volumes, are very similar. However, nowadays in Ukraine and on average in the EU, they have their economics better developed. That definition that we have now does not include those structural differences. However, I would like to insist that a definition that we have is a very good one because structural differences are temporary. Nowadays, we have an opportunity to compare with European countries because beforehand there were problems with definition of SME in Ukraine. And the third thing I would like to focus on is that difference is not really significant. At least nowadays, we should not really focus on it. It's negligible. Another difference between Ukraine and countries of the EU is quite a large number of physical persons, entrepreneurs. So those natural entrepreneurs normally fall under a simplified taxation system, and quite a large number of them are pseudo self-employed people. It's worthwhile to remember the data about 2011. When compared to the year 2010, the number of natural entrepreneurs reduced within 1 year by 500,000. And accordingly, the sales volumes and deployment have declined. However, those changes concerning employment, the changes only took place inside the sector. If you look into employment for Ukraine as a country, in that same year, employment for Ukraine in general did not really change. Therefore, we believe that probably that change also happened due to reduction of the number of pseudo self-employed by enactment of the new tax code. Another difference which must be remembered is that in Ukraine, SME operates in those sectors and is involved in the activity where they have low profitability and low productivity. Generally, compared to European countries, it's a big problem because small and medium business is actually sensitive towards various economic shocks. It's worthwhile to note structural differences. If you compare data about Ukraine and European Union, if you look into the structure of the number of companies in the EU and Ukraine, the picture is the same as in other countries. However, if you look into sales volumes, there we can see big differences. Because unlike European countries, in Ukraine, the share of sales volumes falling onto a medium company is much higher. At the same time, share of small business is substantially lower. It doesn't mean that in Ukraine middle business is really well developed. However, what it means is that in Ukraine, compared to European countries, small business is rather weak. That's it.
Thank you, Artur. As you know, in this research document, one of the most interesting things describes typology of dividing small and medium size companies and self-employed people offered by German colleagues. Very interesting category. The stuck in the middle companies that do not develop, is very interesting category. We might have our own reasons why these companies are not growing. Certain number was growing over the years, but some did not. And we would like to ask our colleagues from Europe, what are the reasons why we have such companies and why their number increased over the years? Is this indicator of economic problems, or maybe the state policy is also to be blamed, the state policy for SME? Alexander, would you say something? Дякую.
The term stuck in the middle, so what we're talking about here, allow me a metaphor, it's like a Formula One racing car stuck in a traffic jam. Yeah, so you have companies, they have growth potential, they are willing to grow, they have scalable business models, they even identify some chances to explore new markets for exports, for instance, but they are not able to grow. And this is really a bad thing. We are not talking about encouraging startups or encouraging people. We have these people who are encouraged, who are willing to create employment, but they are not able. And there's a couple of barriers. One barrier for export will be reduced by introducing the DCFTA. So this is a good news. But we have other growth barriers, and one is the huge administrative burden, and the other is access to finance. And maybe we can talk about the access to finance later, but these are some striking growth barriers.
Дякую, Олександре. Ще один такий.
Thank you, Alexander. Another important point in this research, these pseudo-self-employed category. We have small companies in Ukraine that create illusion of business. There are several employees, and what they do, they receive salary. But there is no real entrepreneurship, no real increase. And from this standpoint, it would be interesting to hear comment from our German colleagues. Let me ask Mr. Otten to speak, then maybe some other colleagues would add.
Thank you for the question. Well, the phenomenon here of the pseudo self-employed companies is, I think, most people sitting here know what we are talking about. These are 38% of the total number, which is a very significant number, but these are mainly people who are working under a civil agreement as Čepečníci, yeah, but where they are actually employees. Yeah, but since these Čepečníci, yeah, they only pay 5% of their turnover as a tax. But if they would have been employed, the employer would have to pay 67% of taxes for social funds contribution and for individual income tax. 67% because I count from the net salary, because we have here the social fund contribution of roughly about 40%, employers part 36.5%, and employees part 3.5% roughly. Which is 40%, and we have individual income tax 15%, and starting with the minimum salary 10 times 17%. And if you count this on the net salary, then you end up at 67 tax burden for the companies. And of course, for them, it's much easier saying, so, hey, you guy, maybe you provide your services as a Čepečník, we pay you the 5% what you need to pay to take to the state, and maybe even 10%, then you have a bit more, and we both earn money. But this is, of course, some kind of employment avoidance. And so far, this is not tackled, let's say almost not tackled and investigated by the tax inspections. Because you can understand, here we have a tax system which is, well, following the procedure form over substance, I call it, means these service agreements, they are formally perfect. Yeah, they have everything what is for the documentation needed, and therefore, since the tax investigations follow a formal approach, they do not touch that. Though we can see in the last 1 or 2 years that tax inspections start looking after that, because they of course see that this is a significant problem for the social fund for the social funds where they are lacking money. This is one part of the so-called pseudo self-employed. The other part, they even don't work. They are part of the black money laundering scheme. This we know as well. Means a company receives from a pseudo self-employed an invoice about marketing services, consulting services, whatsoever. Yeah? And this invoice is paid, and 90% of the paid money is flowing back in cash. Yeah, what is that needed for? Of course, since we have widespread corruption here in Ukraine, they need black money, and this is how it is actually generated. The other part is that also very many employments are officially on a much lower salary. So we know, let's say, very many companies pay 50% officially, and the other 50% in cash. Yeah? And this cash money also needs to be generated, and this is also via this kind of scheme. So you, as you can see, if we have 38% of all these SMEs, what we have, I think the general number was 1.6 million companies, yeah? 38% are actually not business. Yeah? These are employees, in fact, or it's a part of a fraud system. And of course, we need to understand this fraud system. These people who provide this kind of services, they are, if this will be prosecuted, they will be also put into question. And this, of course, in the long run needs to be changed, but not via only looking after this from the tax inspection side, but also, of course, with combating especially corruption. And this is a big issue in that case. Also interesting was what you told, Artur, that you noticed that we had a significant drop in 2011, from 2010 to 2011, of these very small enterprises. The reason is very simple. You mentioned this is the tax code. Yes, it is. Or it was, let's say, like this. Because in 2011, These services provided from, or goods, anything from these чепешники, it was not possible to have this as tax-deductible expenses. And that's the reason why this number dropped so significantly. This tax deductibility was again put in place at the beginning of 2012, and then the number grew again. So you see, it was actually rather simple. Does that answer the question?
Дякую. Можливо,
I would like to add some comments why this is a problem from an economic point of view, because what we have here, we have not a level playing field. So when you are an innovative company, an IT company, let's say, and you want to create an internationally competitive business, and you want to employ specialists, and you want to compete in a local market, and then you compete with companies who reduce their employment costs just by exploiting a legal system which was not made for lowering wages, then it's very difficult for you to compete. And then that's a huge growth barrier. At the same time, when you want to start a business and you start as a single entrepreneur and you want to grow, you want to do some really innovative service, but you want to start from the scratch, and then you compete with a huge sea of pseudo-self-employed, and it's difficult to observe prices, so you see something like dumping prices. Because these companies don't need an overhead, they don't need investment in marketing. They don't, companies, I mean these pseudo-self-employed, they don't need marketing costs. They don't have administration costs. So all that you have as a real company, and so you cannot compete with their prices. So it's a growth barrier, it's actually a startup business, a startup barrier for service industry. And the third issue is, we're also talking here about entrepreneurship as a means of freedom of occupation. So actually what we want is people who like the life of being an entrepreneur like we have, and who see that going this entrepreneurial career is their path of doing a living. But these pseudo-self-employed often have no choice. They have low bargaining power, so they want to work like employed, but they are not able because they don't get offer a normal contract. They are only able to be employed by such a contract. So that's not our idea of entrepreneurship.
Дякую, Томас і Олександр. І не знаю, як на мене, ми зараз підходимо до одного
Thank you, Thomas and Alexander. And now we come to a very important question for Ukrainian small and medium-sized businesses. This is a key question for Ukraine: access to finance. Many banks offer loans beginning at 26% interest, and this is considered to be acceptable level. Some go from 36 up to 60% a year, which for small and medium-sized business is unbearable. So in these conditions, it's impossible to organize business. And you, in your strategic recommendations, have mentioned that one of the needs and possibility for strategic development is increasing access to finance. So from your experience, what would you like to share? Is there a special vision for Ukraine? What can you recommend? I think Mr. Ricardo Giucci will begin, and then maybe someone else from colleagues would add if necessary.
Topic of finance is, of course, not only important for SMEs, but practically for all companies, also for private persons in some cases. So finance is an important topic. Relations to banks are also important. But here, according to what Alexander Knuth identified as our main focus, I would like to also to focus here on finance for growth-oriented SMEs. Yeah? How these companies that want to grow and they have a nice perspectives for that, how they can get financed in order to grow. And actually, in the context of this project by the Naumann-Foundation, I conducted several interviews with a bank and some clients of the banks, small companies and medium-sized companies. And it was quite interesting to see the results of these interviews, because these were just primary sources. These were companies telling us where they see the problems and where they see the opportunities. And I talked to companies in the food industry, pharmaceutical, so more in the industrial sector, not services, but more industrial. And the topics, and of course each sector is different, but in general they said, look, we have very interesting projects here. In the food industry, now we have the possibility to export to the EU. That's feasible. We are competitive on price. We have the access to the market. But of course, the standards for the EU are much higher, so we need to invest. We need to buy new machines, new procedures, new certifications, so we need money to invest in order to produce goods which we can sell to the EU on a good price. And for this investment, we did finance. And when we asked our bank, and I have had a very good relation with the bank, for the loans, they say, yes, we can do that, but as it was said by the chairman, the interest rate would be maybe 30%. And with 30%, you can maybe make some money with arms or with drugs, but not selling food. Yeah? For almost all legal business, 30% is prohibitive. And the question is, of course, well, the implication is that there is a potential, there is an opportunity, and this opportunity cannot be taken. That's exactly what Alexander was saying, this stuck in the middle. Yeah? The question is, what is the case? Why are interests so high? Why is it so difficult to get a loan? And of course, we have to separate here the macroeconomic situation. As you know, the macroeconomic situation is very difficult, and that's a main contributor to the high level of loans. Of course, the inflation is also a reason. We have a very high inflation, and this is something we cannot deal with in the context of a SME project. But I think that the government, and especially the MBU, is taking the right measures to reduce this level, this uncertainty. So in 1-2 years, I think the contribution to that will become more clear. The National Bank is introducing an inflation targeting framework that will be stabilized inflation, that will also reduce the nominal interest rate. So a lot has been done here, but of course this cannot be done in 2 months. It needs 1 year or more for that. When it comes now to the other side, if you ask also the banks, why do you ask for such high interest rates? Apart from the macroeconomic situation, they said, look, we have also problems with the SMEs that come to us. Because they come to us and say, I want a loan. And say, okay, fine, and I would like to know about your credit history, because the bank has to be sure if they give the money that they get it back. So, credit history, normally you ask a credit bureau for that. And the credit bureaus in Ukraine, there are credit bureaus, there's a very good legislation on that, but unfortunately the situation is there are lots of credit bureaus which do not cooperate much with each other. So if you're a bank and you need information about a potential borrower, you have to ask different bureaus, and the information is fragmented, is incomplete. So you have to ask a lot of bureaus, it costs money, and you get fragmented information in different standards, and at the end you're not really sure, can I do it or not? And that's why actually we had a project with KfW, and I see a representative here, and we produced a report on that. In order to improve the cooperation between credit bureaus. This is not just the government, which is important, or the National Bank, but the private sector, in order to provide better services to banks, so that if someone asks for a loan, they can check, like in Germany, you all know Schufa, for example, you check what other credits are there, what happened in the past, what about mobile phone, did the company pay the mobile phone, did they pay always the rent, did they pay everything, and if it's a good history, I can provide the loan. If it's a bad history, then of course you would not provide the loan. So that's one very important topic, and this is important especially for small and medium-sized companies, because if you're talking about big business, then of course the information is much easier to get by, because about big loans, they're known. But for small business, medium-sized business, it's more difficult. The other topic has to do with the quality of financial reporting of balance sheets. If you're a banker and someone comes to you and says, I want a loan, the first thing you say is, well, okay, what do you want to do with the money? And please show me the balance sheet of your company so that I can check the numbers. And here again, I talked to Western banks, so Ukrainian banks owned by Western banks, I mean, Italy and other countries. And what they said is that according to Ukrainian legislation, financial reporting is done in a certain way, which does not provide us much information. In order to decide whether to provide a loan, and these banks need international standards of financial reporting, so that they have a quite clear picture of what's going on in the company. And many, like big companies, they have, of course, this international accounting as well, I suppose. Thomas will know better. But for a small company, of course, they just use the national standards. They don't have the international. And when they go to the bank, they say, I'm sorry, I cannot use this balance sheet because for my company, my mother company in Germany, in Italy, or wherever, I need proper bookkeeping according to international standards. And that's why it would be very important to introduce, of course, national standards in Ukraine for SME, but this national standard should be very much approximated to EU or international standards. And as far as I understand, in the DCFTA, this approximation should take place, so I think at least partly. And our recommendation to the government would be to try to start this process very fast, because in that way, the access to finance of SME would be, it will be not changed from 0 to 100, but it will contribute to have a better access. If not today, maybe in a few months. And this topic of balance sheets is not just important for bank loans, because we should not look at finance purely from a point of view of banks. I mean, there are lots of entrepreneurs in other countries, also in Germany, that might be interested to come to Ukraine and see the opportunities. I mean, the assets now are quite low after devaluation, so there is a possibility to participate in business. In this food company I was talking about, maybe some German company would come and say, okay, let's be partners. I buy 50% of your company. I bring the money. So it's not a loan, it's not interest rate, it's capital. I have access to the German EU market. I know how to introduce the goods. So there are lots of advantages from that. But again, this company, if they have to decide how much to pay here for a company, they need proper books. And they need to know exactly according to their knowledge of international standards. And if they have some Ukrainian standards, bookkeeping and balance sheets, they cannot take a decision on that. No? That's why these standards for bookkeeping and especially for financial reporting, I think are essential to promote the financial exchange and the transfers from the West to Ukraine. So that would be the main points regarding financial. I think Thomas wants to add something.
Yeah, I would like to add concerning what Ricardo mentioned concerning the Ukrainian accounting standards. Actually, this might, what you are talking about might sound frightening, but it should be not, because actually the Ukrainian accounting standards have been implemented in 1999 only, and they're in principle based on IFRS. Yeah, which means so actually the system to the international system concerning accounting is very, very close. The difference is only mostly in the reporting. Means because here the reporting is targeted to state authorities, and they, of course, they are not interested in any details, which means the accounting system itself does not need to be changed significantly. It's only that the reporting would need to be changed based on already existing accounting what we have. This is why I say there's not such a long road to go. It's only for the reporting which should be more targeted as we have for IFRS on investors or management, and not on state authorities, because here we have, of course, that in Ukrainian accounting mostly tax accounting is of most importance. Clear, because well, nobody would like to fight with tax inspections here, though we have to every day. But for example, if a company doesn't follow the Ukrainian accounting standards, meaning because every company is obliged to provide to undergo an audit in principle, but if Ukrainian companies, Tovkas, do not provide an audit, there's no punishment. So this is the result is nobody does an audit. Yeah. So here's once again, not such a long road to go. Thanks.
Дякую, Томас. Ми фактично затронули уже питання.
Thank you. Now we actually touched the issue of administrative obstacles. Actually, reporting from the administrative perspective complicates doing business in Ukraine. If we speak of other administrative barriers, you mentioned this as one of the strategic recommendations. What else should attention be paid to? What are the other problematic areas? You spoke of primary documents, maybe permits, and so on. So what would you like to insist on? What should be taken into account by the new government, new parliament in the process of the reform, which has at least been declared?
Takes over, because to inform you that actually we have been advising the government on such topics also before. So in 2010, we worked a lot on the tax code with the Ministry of Finance on that time. And also now with these standards, we plan to do something. And our advice is not to have a system which you don't have a proper documentation and bookkeeping. Of course, bookkeeping is extremely important for a company. We don't want to just bring it to a minimum and then that would be not the right way. This documentation is important for the company itself as a tool of management. It's important for creditors so that they can check how reliable everything is. And this is also important for the government, for the Ministry of Finance and the tax revenues to ensure that they know how to tax a company. But of course, there must be the level of cost which is linked to this documentation should be as small as possible. And what we have seen talking to different companies here is that actually this cost here is very high because the system is quite inefficient. And we have with Thomas, maybe he can explain that, some recommendations to change the necessities for the documents and not in a way to have an experiment here and experiment with Ukraine something completely new. What we're saying is just to use something which, for example, is used in Germany and which has worked for 20 years or more, and maybe or in Austria or in the States, and introduce it here. So the recommendations are very much based on experience, on international experience, so there is not the risk that everything will not work. Maybe, Thomas, you can...
Yeah, as for primary documentation, what do we have here? Можно на русском будет, наверное, проще, да? Хорошо. Вот. У нас есть, конечно, все...
Of course, we have bill of lading, we have tax invoice, we have VAT invoice, and also we have business trip certificate. Those documents, nobody understands what they are about. If you travel somewhere, you need that certificate stamped. Without that document, there won't be tax-deductible expenditures. That document in the tax code was cancelled, still requested by tax authority. All the information in all those documents we can find on one document, and here that document is not in place. This is invoice, because all the information is just on the invoice. Therefore, our recommendation is to merge all the data on one document, which in the West, not only in the West, is called invoice. It includes tax number, we have certain format for that, and the only document is the invoice. And this would be much easier for the accounting because if just one signature absent, one seal absent, one order absent, then we cannot the accounting office. If a basic document is the invoice, it's easier to treat. It works in our country and it works everywhere. We also must say that they already did lots of things. With that improved the situation.
So there have been quite many things already done, because if you see the recent Doing Business report, which just has been published, I think, a week or two ago, there you see that Ukraine's rank concerning paying taxes was getting better for 49 places. How could that happen? Because by now, electronic reporting is almost for all reports possible. It was changed that you have only single corporate profit tax report per year, which is of course reduces the burden for the Ukrainian taxpayers. Then VAT registration became much easier. We will see how this will work next year with the new VAT administration system. Well, we are here ambitious. We will see how this will work. Since we are mostly dealing with the awful things, I recorded what else was done. Well, at the beginning of this year, in May, improving efficiency of tax audits, one might say you're kidding. Because if you face current practice with tax audits, it's still the same approach that they come into your office and say, hey, look, we need this certain amount of money. And well, let's agree on something, and they put pressure to the taxpayers. This, of course, needs to stop. And the heads of the State Fiscal Tax Service, Mr. Bilaus, and also from the State Tax Police, they mean it really. So if you see some kind of these threats or asks, please inform them, and then they will stop that. But of course, tax inspection are still so far playing with that, putting pressure on the chief accounting, Головной ответственность. And with this, they play with us. Please inform the heads, because the communication between the high level of the tax inspection and the middle level, especially in the regions, still doesn't work. Also, but what was becoming better in this sphere is that they're not checking every taxpayer every 3 years. So they already understood that it is better to check big taxpayers. This is what we consulted as well, because it does not make sense to check a business where anyway is not that much money. So it's better to check big business, and this is what they followed as well. Thanks.
Дякую, Рікардо і Томас.
Thank you, Ricardo and Thomas. Before that, we had a question how to increase access to finance, and I just thought in several federal subjects of United States, the rate higher than 30% is considered to be racketeering and is criminally investigatable and punishable. So we need to regulate the market of financial deposits and then loans. But this comment leads us to another important question: state regulation and state support for small and medium-sized business. And in this context, I would like to expand the question, and I will ask for your brief comments to have more time later. What can the state do to support small and medium-sized business, and what role can play international partners of Ukraine, international financial institutions, to increase access of SMEs to loans? Who can answer this question?
The finance aspect, yeah.
Finance
and policy,
yeah.
Both. With the finance, the international donors, they have your technical assistance. I mentioned a project for the Ministry of Finance of Germany on credit bureaus. I think to continue on such issues, no matter who does it, would be important to try to improve the situation with information, credit bureaus and legislation. Then, of course, technical assistance regarding the implementation of new standards once they are approached, because one thing is to pass this through parliament or have some new decrees. The other is then to support companies and also accountants when they do this. So there is a lot of room here for technical assistance. But then, of course, what many banks are doing, many development banks also in Germany, is to provide funds to some partner banks. And actually, KfW can explain that much better. But the idea is you give German KfW, for example, provides a loan to a bank here, and this money is then passed to small business in order to get loans. So the refinancing side is provided, and then the banks have to, of course, check very carefully that the money is used wisely, but they would provide loans. I think the other banks, other development banks do the same. So I think there is a lot of room here for such kind of activities in the technical assistance, in financial assistance. And, but as far as I know, this is being done. And one important topic would be to improve the framework for financial assistance in Ukraine, which is quite complicated. I know many Western donors have lots of money which like to use for Ukraine, but the procedure to bring this money to Ukraine and use it in a way which is according to their rules is quite difficult. And that's why a reform of the financial assistance framework in Ukraine would be very important to facilitate this kind of activities.
Дякую. І, можливо, Олександр, по політиці, державна підтримка,
Thank you, Alexander. And the support state policy reform.
Finance would be subsidies. So this is very interesting for SME. And we have a lot of experience in Germany and in Western countries how to deal with subsidies, meaning how to invest subsidies in a way that it contributes to the economies, the entire economies' wealth. So it's not the question whether or not a subsidy amount is nice for the company. It's always nice, but in the end it's the taxpayers' money, so you need to have an impact on the entire economy, not just on the company itself. The problem that I see here currently in Ukraine, as I said, we have this picture of the Formula One racing car stuck in a traffic jam, and now you try to give to the Formula One racing car some new fuel. So wouldn't change the situation. And to be more seriously, the problem is such subsidy schemes. They require high amounts of public budget. And this is just not suitable for Ukraine right now because the public budget is under pressure and there's no room left for startup innovation programs. And the second thing is, in order to administer such subsidy programs as well as incubator programs and similar programs, you need very good capacity. And currently, we don't have such a capacity. I mean, authorities with decades of experience and in administering such programs, identifying, checking, assessing possible candidates for subsidies. And since we have not that capacity in Ukraine right now, I think it's not suitable at the moment. At the moment, we should work on the framework conditions. However, once we have improved framework, this could be an option in the future, of course.
Дякую. Ну що ж, я думаю, знаєте,
Thank you. You know, experts who work on certain problems, they can discuss among themselves for a long time. They can go in every detail of every problem, but you might have some questions. Of course, we tried to separate every important aspect and to give certain comments and explanations on each. Still, what questions or comments, clarifications you might have on everything we discussed, and please raise your hand. Our colleague with microphone would approach you to ensure translation. Thank you very much. Is it on? It is on. My question is to Mr. Knuth. Did I understand you correctly? You said that in 2011 there was improvement of tax system, or did I hear it by mistake? I think that was a year when businessmen went to Maidan, and they're still in courts for those nails that they nailed into the tiles. What improvement, tax improvement, did you mean? I didn't understand you. When they cancelled simplified accounting system and 200,000 or 300,000 jobs were lost. Did you say 500 were lost through those, as you called them, non-motivated self-employed who were just washing, laundering money? What improvement happened in 2011? Please explain. And then in your report, do you have description of influence of economic freedom? Because I flipped through the report, but I don't see that you have touched upon the issue.
I did say that, so it was not a mistake. The situation improved a lot because the tax system is now much more modern and much more converged to Western standards. I know also about the problems on the business Maidan. The thing is, and my colleagues will add this, this framework was not has not been made worse for such natural entrepreneurs. So the situation for natural entrepreneurs were even improved. However, what was made worse was the possibility to use pseudo self-employment for money laundering. So for those big companies who exploit natural entrepreneurs, for them it was a threat. And having said that, one is the fact, one is the legal, and the other thing is the communication and the way how this improvement was communicated. This was done in an inefficient way. So instead of seeing the improvements, many people feared. And this is why we had these riots, because people didn't understand how the situation improved. About losing jobs, now what Artur said is actually from 2010 to 2011, 500,000 natural entrepreneurs disappeared from statistics, but employment didn't change at all. So the only explanation is that we have seen people who were employed in 2010 and employed in 2011, but had some sort of side business under the simplified taxation scheme. This is my answer.
Please.
Maybe, again, maybe to explain our perspective. We are not, and I think Alexander Knuth made it clear, we are not pushing small business to increase and become bigger and bigger. We care about the whole economy. Yeah? And I think SME has an important role, but the goal is not to have a big SME sector. The goal is to have a competitive economy. And for that, you need a level playing field. And what we had during the simplified taxation system, before the tax code, was a system which was not good. Because these individual entrepreneurs were paying very little taxes. And the question is, why should some people pay very little taxes and others pay a lot of taxes? That's not a level playing field. So what we are saying is all companies should be treated equally. And in the case of small business, they were treated not equally, but in taxation issues, they had huge advantages, which were not really justified. And we have a paper on that we can send you. We had a paper of the amount of employment in the individual entrepreneurs and their contribution to taxes. And their contribution to taxes was minimal. And of course, you need to pay for police, you need to pay for army, you need to pay for the education, for everything. And you cannot have a huge sector of the economy just not paying taxes. And for the perspective of SME, you might say it's good for us. But from an economic perspective, and this is the perspective we have, it's not a good thing. And that's why we criticize that, and we also, if I may say, contributed to this change. And of course, the reaction by the Maidan people will say, look, I want my privileges back. But I think that's normal, that you fight for your privileges.
Скажите, пожалуйста, можно мне еще задать?
May I ask another question, please? The tax policy of today's government, Yatsenyuk's government, and taxes 7% of VAT for medicine, the currency tax, others, and the war tax. How do you assess all of these novelties of the new government?
We are talking, I mean, the topic here is more like SME policy, and now we are coming to a huge, I mean, if maybe we can, after, if we have some coffee afterwards, discuss this, but I would like to give the opportunity to the floor to focus more on SME issues and on the presentation, and the war tax is topic which is a bit too, I think, out of the scope.
Да, просто розумієте, ймовірно, наш
Sometimes for our colleagues it's difficult. For our colleagues it's difficult to keep track of all the changes that happen very quickly. I remember when one of the national channels invited me to make a comment on the war tax. When I prepared to that, I began to dig up the history, where the history remembered such things. I came down to the period of bourgeois revolution in France. Before the beginning of it, the king, for the last time in the mankind, introduced war tax. We all remember what was the outcome of that. I just wanted to illustrate. He was Ludovic XVI, if I remember. We all know what was the outcome of that. Sometimes certain things which are not really bad, some normal initiatives, economically justified initiatives, happen from time to time. However, they take place without any public discussion. They never ask those who will be affected what do they think of it, and how we can improve administration or reporting in such novelties. And this causes a lot of resistance sometimes. However, with unified tax, it was a different situation, because in the former government they had one vision. Then Tax Maidan forced to change that vision and to introduce changes that happen to be more acceptable. I think for our colleagues it would be easier to keep track of the influence of those taxes post factum, as well as their effect for the economy. Also, our international colleagues are looking into the situation of the economy as integrated mechanism, not just of the particular sector, which are physical entrepreneurs, natural entrepreneurs, payers of the single tax, and not just the SME. They view the economy as an integrated, balanced mechanisms. So please have that in mind when you make your comments. Now more questions.
I'm a sector manager in the EU delegation, and I deal with private support. We are trying to design a program in support to private sector with focus on SMEs right now. And I have actually two questions. One of them is to Alexander. When you were comparing the SME sector in Ukraine and the EU, you mentioned those three indicators, but there is another indicator which is more correct to be used, I think, and this is the share of the SME sector in the GDP. Did you investigate on this? What is, according to you, the share of the SME sector in Ukraine? Because I hear different figures, I must say, from 12% to 30%. And we know that in the EU it's much higher. It's around, if I'm not mistaken, about 60%. And my second question is regarding the focus which you put in your recommendations on the growth of the SMEs, understood as a growth of the SME itself. As far as I understood your presentation, we have to support growth of the SMEs because somehow for the economic development of the country, it is important to stimulate those SMEs which have potential for growth. I see here a bit of contradiction because from one side we recognize the importance of the SME sector, but if we push for SMEs to grow and to become big enterprises, it is impossible that all of them become big enterprises, right? Isn't it? Do you see some contradiction here in this recommendation?
Sure.
And thank you very, very much for this question. Because what we see here is from different SME experts, different perspectives, and it's an ongoing discussion. So, okay, the first question is about GDP. We weren't even able to get the GDP share data of the EU. Even the official EU SME barometer uses sales as the indicator, but sales is a good proxy. So you're right, the share of GDP would be the best indicator, but the sales is a very good proxy. And you would see the same picture that the contribution of the GDP is in Ukraine higher than in Germany. But this is, again, this is not a success. This is, it is actually a failure because, as you said, it's I'm completely confident in this. It's not the idea to have many SME. SME are most vulnerable to economic crisis, economic shocks. According to all statistical and scientific research, SME on average pay lower wages. SME on average provide less training for their employees. So it's the small and medium size stage is just a stage in the life cycle of a company. When you start, you need to grow until you become a big company. And you should see this medium size and a small size as a step in the life cycle. And the idea of SME policy, like we understand, and like it's the current policy in Germany, for instance, is to help companies to go through this life cycle. So give them the support they need for each stage. And the idea is to have as many big companies as possible. You would have a constant stream of startups because it's very interesting to be a big company, because you experience the possibilities to create value, to make profit. So when you have a healthy economy, you will always have a lot of startups. And these startups put competition pressure on the big companies. But of course, the most efficient markets in the world have at the same time the smallest SME sectors. So if you see the figures of the United States, this SME sector is even smaller. And the United States, you wouldn't say it's not an entrepreneurial society, quite the opposite.
Дякую. Ну, насправді
Thank you. With the estimates of our GDP, we do have quite many problems. Now people speak about the reform of statistics systems, or the system of national accounts, or the entire sectors of economy which are never included into GDP, like non-for-profit sector, though it also produces a certain product in the form of services, at least. More questions? We also understand if even the best company comes to the bank with very good credit history, anyway the bank will never give the loan for less than 22-23% of annual interest. Don't you think that the main thing is political decision? like Roosevelt did at some point, to bring together leaders of the banks, either president's office or central bank, and to pass the law that you cannot exceed interest rate more than up to 15%, because otherwise, for 23 years of independence, our economy becomes not so good. Our friends just can buy things cheaply. I don't see any motivation to European banker or entrepreneur to speak for better condition of entrepreneurship. But this is of no profit to them. In Europe, Russia, America, just want Ukraine to have cheap companies to buy things cheaply. This is nothing about ethics, just about business. Of course, for every business, it's better to buy things cheaply. As money is very cheap, interest rate is 0, 1 or 2% of annual interest, then there is no point for them to help our business to develop. So there must be local political decision. So it's up to our country to take that decision. Please introduce yourself before you speak.
Likes to blame the banks for everything. We do also have this sports in Germany. Don't worry about this. But of course, sometimes you have to defend banks, because a bank is an intermediary. And if I ask you, if you bring some money to the bank in hryvnia, you will also not say, okay, I'm happy with 2% interest rates per year. Because you will say, look, inflation rate is, what's inflation rate at the moment? 15, 17%, I don't know. So I want at least this amount of interest so that I don't lose purchasing power with my deposit in the bank. And on top, I want some real interest rate. So if you, with your money, go to the bank with hryvnia, you might say, for less than 18, 20%, I'm not bringing the money to the bank. Okay, that's the thing. So the bank gets the money from you and from all other people, let's say for 20%. And of course, they have to earn some money on top, because if they pass this 20%, who is paying for the building, who is paying for the accounting and for the people working there? So they need to put some spread on that. And on top comes that some of the loans they provide will become I would say, they will not be paid back, default. So they have to have a certain probability of that. They have to calculate that into the interest rate as well. And that's why the important thing is not actually the level of the, for the regulator, for policy. The important topic is not the level of the loan, but the spread. And the important topic is the spread very big? Yeah? Between deposits rates and lending rates. And here to focus only on the nominal rate with an inflation rate which is very high, I think is not fair. And every attempt to deal with the loans, with the nominal interest rates of banks by the government directly will create lots of problems. I mean, the banks, their business is to provide loans. They live on that. And if they ask for higher interest rate, it's because they need them. And the government is not a better banker than the bank. So I would say hands off the banking sector, and this kind of intervention is not good for the country, and is certainly not in line with the liberal environment of this conference.
Ну, якщо можливо, просто коментар. Ви сказали правильно, що головне...
It's an important comment, indeed. The spread is more important than the final level. If shareholders of the bank are in Italy or Germany, they expect 1.5–2%. So a spread which that bank is giving the loan at via its subsidiary in Ukraine, which exceeds 27–30%. Indeed, the spread is such big that they can practically do anything out of it. So, please introduce yourself before you ask a question. Do you have more questions? Here in the first row. I'm Alexander Krivenko. I'm a lawyer, a journalist. My first question is about e-governance, e-democracy. As a basic thing to overcome corruption and to improve government policy for development of SMEs in particular. Could you share any experience of monitoring of the situation with doing such a reform in terms of e-government and e-democracy in Ukraine? Could you please demonstrate your own experience in countries of the EU? How such reforms affect improvement of the climate, of investment climate for development of SMEs, as well as regulatory support of development of such companies? Thank you.
Чесно скажучи, ми не розглядали в цьому звіті.
As you might have seen, we emphasize here actually the analytical part, distinction of the different segments which are there. And if we continue working on this topic, then the next step would be, if you look at the stack in the middle, what are the concrete measures to be taken here? If you look at pseudo-employment, what is to be done here? Even more concrete than now, but this is more the analytical part. But e-government, I think it's a very effective way to combat corruption, because if you present something through email, you don't have even this personal contact, so nobody can ask you for some money or whatever. And I think that it is a very good development if it can be introduced. I know from the presidential administration, from Kyiv, that this is a main topic now for the government. I know from the National Bank that they're introducing also e-government. Sometimes e-government means that communication goes through email, yeah, which in some institutions it didn't happen before. And so I think a lot of potential, but to be honest, we are not in a position now to give some clear advice. We should prepare something on that before.
One more comment? Of course. Any e-government strategy could, with respect to SME sector, only be a flanking measure. So when you're not able to tackle the real problems, you won't have any impact of e-government, because we have here pseudo self-employment, we have subsistence businesses, and it doesn't matter whether they file electronically or personally. There are other mechanisms, reasons behind it. But when you tackle the real problems, e-government could be a good tool for an add-on.
Я хотів би все ж таки і другу частину попросити розкрити. Мова йшла також про
Ask about the second question as well, electronic democracy. In my view, these are similar issues but not the same. Electronic democracy as a way to lobby by communities of small and medium-sized businesses to lobby their interests in legislative initiatives in protection of small and medium-sized companies. Can you say something about that? And maybe there are some examples in your experience if this is part of your competency. Mr. Alexander, I believe that we are talking more about economy in our topic today, and not about advocacy or lobbyism or other ways of promoting certain things. I think everyone here would agree that comprehensive introduction of all instruments, including electronic democracy and electronic governance, are important issues, and it's important to work in every direction. But my colleagues are more focused on macroeconomics, state support of SME, policy change. This is their focus. So let's move on to the next question. I just remembered another important example. It's interesting that many countries have gone through serious changes in government policies and instruments applied for SMEs development, including deregulation and changes of principles. But I just thought of Italians, they're not pragmatists in every issue, but at some point they counted the cost of paper democracy, paper bureaucracy, the paper, the cartridges, and everything else, toners for printer, and they were shocked. It's not counting the working time of employees, just real costs. And they decided, let's include the principle of silent agreement. If we do not object to your documents, then do whatever you want, considering the papers you have submitted. If there is an objection, we will send them to you in due time set by a regulation. So e-governance here plays an important role, not procedurally only, but also decreasing the costs and the time to review certain documents. Any more questions from the audience? To my colleagues? Then the small comment, very brief. I would like to thank respected group of experts, German consulting group, for very interesting presentation. But I would suggest that you should be closer to life and to provide more urgent reaction to all the actions or suggestions by our government, because 10 years ago you have raised Irina Kimova, if I'm not mistaken, and then she's going into parliament again. But you just mentioned Great French Revolution. I would like to remind you the statement by Minister of Finance, who came after all that destruction in the nation. He said, I cannot give you anything except for freedom to become rich. And I don't know how many months it took for France to be restored after the ruin caused by revolution. Same thing Lenin did with a new economic policy after revolution, but unfortunately our government led by Yatsenyuk does not understand this. My question, my name is Gribinchuk. Remark, another remark. Please use microphone to have interpretation. Daria.
Because you mentioned about another paradigm between competition of small and medium enterprises and big enterprises, and it's like well-known disruptive innovation model of Christensen, and I think it's and it can work in Ukraine only if the small and medium enterprises will use innovation way of development. And in this context, I think it's important to also to talk about development of national innovation system. And in this context, the example of German national innovation system will be very useful. And also it's important to talk in such kind of discussion about development of business, small medium enterprises and educational institutions and scientific institutions, because we know a lot of examples of development, not only the concrete enterprises but the whole industries, not only in developed countries but the countries with a little bit similar economic development like Ukraine. The great examples is chili wine industry or sugar industry in Argentina. And I think it's important also to talk about this kind of things because even if small and medium enterprises work together like association or something like this in concrete industries in cooperation with scientific and laboratories and universities, they will can achieve better results, not even in Ukraine, but in global markets. Thank you.
Чудовий акцент на завершення з приводу інноваційної політики.
This is a great accent to conclude our discussion. Innovative economy is our way of development. Some comments from German colleagues as well as from Artur, and then we'll go to less formal part of our discussion.
To have the scope, because to explain what we did, and this is one first step, and you start with the analysis. You don't start with measures, you start with analysis. And that's what we did here. I mean, mainly Alexander, of course. First, you have to look, what is the SME sector? And you don't have putting measures to help everyone in the SME sector if there are actually parts which are not good for the economy, parts which are like neutral, and other segments are very important. So first you have to understand what is the sector. And once you understood that, you can try drafting some measures to try to achieve some goals in some of these segments. And that would be a possible second step for a project or for other activities. And we didn't want to put everything into one thing. This is not the scope of our work. The scope is first to understand the structure and the possibilities. And if we continue, or if someone else continues doing work, I agree with you, it would be important to go more into detail and looking at more possibilities. But this is not the starting point. This is a second or maybe even a third step. And just to explain why this is not here, and this is also an answer to your remark that we need more concrete things. Yeah, concrete things, yes, but after the analysis, not before that. You cannot substitute analysis by recommending a lot of things.
Томас і за ним Олександр, кінцеві ремарки.
Thomas and then Alexander, final remarks, please.
Yeah, just a brief remark, final remark from my side as well, because I've been attending yesterday also a roundtable conference in Vienna, where we have been asking all the time, so what would be then the best thing, the first thing which should be done here also to develop SME sector, to develop economy? I think Alexander already mentioned this as well. We have here quite a lot of corruption and so on and so on. So the rule of law, and this is what is not working here so far to an extent, because the existing laws which we have here, they are quite good. Of course, there are improvements possible, but rule of law needs to be applied. Rule of law means also independence of judges. This we do not have in Texas as well, because if we fight with tax inspections, you always lose the first instance. Always, you can be 100% right, you know you lose. You only can win in the second one, but this is crazy. Yeah? So rule of law doesn't work, and this is also some kind of answer to your question concerning the margins of the interest rates, because the margins have to be higher because it's more risky. Yeah? And this is also a reflection of rule of law, because it doesn't work. So if rule of law will work, interest rates will go down by themselves. Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, I also want to comment. This was a very good comment, and what you suggested about innovation system, about a national innovation system, about changes in the education system, this is really about the future. Because what would you need then is not only a cooperation between companies, but you would need a real cooperation between companies and state authorities. And this is what currently is missing, a attitude of state authorities to regard companies and SME especially as places where value is created for the society, for the economy, and which are partners to develop this country. And once you have this attitude, then you might think about installing a national innovation system. And in order to develop this attitude, the state authorities can start with showing that they have fair inspections, for instance.
Дякую. Я би, напевно, від імені всіх вас хотів.
Thank you. On behalf of all of you, I'd like to thank our colleagues who represent a German advisory group on economy in Ukraine and organizer of today's event, the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation for Freedom. And it was their demand for the research, and this event is their support. And as Miriam Kosmehl said in the beginning, we invite you to informal part, to exchange our opinions, to talk to each other, to get to know each other. Thank you for your questions and for interesting discussion, especially to colleagues who presented their reports today. Thank you so much.